Welcome to Stories of Satisfaction.
A billionaire comes home earlier than expected after a cancelled meeting, planning to surprise his wife with dinner reservations. But the moment he steps inside his luxurious mansion, something strange happens. His usually calm and respectful housemaid suddenly grabs him by the arm, pulls him into a dark closet, and urgently whispers, "Shut up, don't say a word." Confused and caught off guard, he tries to ask what's going on, but she covers his mouth and insists he stays silent. As he peeks through the closet door, what he sees and hears on the other side changes everything he thought he knew about his family, his marriage, and his own life. What started as a normal evening quickly turns into a terrifying discovery that no one, especially him, could have ever imagined. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. When Michael got home, he didn't expect anything strange. But as soon as he entered, Grace, the housekeeper, quickly pulled him into the coat closet. She covered his mouth so he wouldn't make a sound and whispered that he needed to stay quiet. Michael was confused, but could tell something was very wrong. Grace looked serious and scared. He didn't know why she was hiding him, but he trusted her. Inside the closet it was dark and quiet, except for the voices coming from the next room. Michael looked through a small crack in the closet door. He saw his wife, Vanessa, and his brother Robert standing together. They were laughing and holding glasses of champagne. It didn't make sense to him at first. He was supposed to be close to both of them. He felt shocked that they were celebrating without him. He kept watching, trying to understand what was going on, while Grace stayed next to him, listening closely to everything outside. As Michael continued watching through the crack in the door, things became even worse. He heard Robert and Vanessa talking in low voices, but it was still clear enough to understand. They were not just having fun together, they were planning something terrible. Michael listened in disbelief as they spoke about poisoning him. They mentioned that they had been doing it slowly, adding small doses over time so that no one would notice. Their goal was to make his death look natural. This way, they could take over his company without raising suspicion. Michael felt his heart sink. These were the two people he thought he could trust most. Now he realized they had betrayed him in the worst way. He began to feel sick, and it wasn't just from what he had heard. It was the poison. The symptoms were starting to appear. His head hurt, his body felt weak, and he began to panic. Still, he had to stay quiet and think fast. Michael's breathing became heavier as he realized the poison was affecting him again. His head was spinning and it was hard to stay calm. But he knew he had to be careful. One wrong move could give him away. He tried to adjust his position inside the cramped closet, but his arm brushed against a shelf. A small object fell to the floor and made a loud sound. It was just a small thud, but in the silence of the house, it felt much louder. Outside the closet, Robert and Vanessa stopped talking. The laughter disappeared, and there was only silence. Michael could hear the change in their tone. They had heard the noise. They were now alert and suspicious. Grace turned her head quickly toward him. Her eyes were wide, and she understood the danger. She knew that if they found Michael, everything would be lost. They had to act fast to avoid being caught, but there wasn't much time. Robert and Vanessa started moving around the room, trying to find the source of the sound. Michael could hear their footsteps getting closer. Grace knew that if they opened the closet door, it would be over. She stayed calm and began thinking of what she could do. She needed to make a distraction, something strong enough to draw their attention away from the closet. She whispered to Michael to stay hidden and not move no matter what. Then she quietly opened the closet door just a little, enough to slip out without being seen. Michael watched as she disappeared into the hallway. A few seconds later, a loud crash came from another part of the house. Robert and Vanessa reacted quickly and went to check out the noise. The plan had worked. Grace had given them something else to focus on. Michael stayed in the closet, his body shaking, still feeling the poison in his veins, but thankful for Grace's quick thinking. Inside the closet, Michael tried to pull himself together. His hands were shaking and sweat ran down his face. He felt dizzy and weak, but he knew he needed to stay strong. Every second felt like forever as he waited, hoping that Robert and Vanessa would stay distracted long enough for him to get away. He tried to control his breathing and stay alert. Grace had risked a lot to help him, and he couldn't let that go to waste. He could still hear noise coming from another part of the house, where the distraction had worked, but he didn't know how long that would last. He tried to think of a plan, but his mind was clouded by the effects of the poison. Still, one thing was clear. He had to get out of there soon. If he stayed too long, he might pass out. If Robert and Vanessa returned before he escaped, they would surely finish what they started. As the minutes passed, Michael pushed himself to move. He carefully opened the closet door and stepped out, holding onto the wall to keep his balance. He looked around to make sure no one was nearby. The hallway was empty. Grace had done her job. Michael didn't waste time. He walked slowly, but with purpose, each step harder than the last. His legs felt weak, and he was afraid he might collapse. He moved through the house, avoiding the direction where he had heard Robert and Vanessa go. He knew he needed help, and fast. He thought about calling someone or getting to a neighbor's house. He also knew he couldn't let them get away with what they had done. They had tried to kill him, and they had done it together. The betrayal hurt deeply, but right now, staying alive was all that mattered. He kept moving, step by step, determined to survive. Grace acted fast. She needed to make a noise loud enough to draw Robert and Vanessa far away from the coat closet where Michael was still hiding. She ran to a hallway near the garage where several boxes were stacked against the wall. With one quick move, she kicked over the whole stack. The crash was loud and sudden, echoing through the house. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. She didn't wait to see their reaction. She hurried back toward the closet. From inside, Michael could hear the noise and the voices of Robert and Vanessa changing direction. They were no longer near the closet. They were heading to the garage to see what happened. As soon as Grace saw they were out of sight, she opened the closet door and grabbed Michael by the arm. He was weak and confused, but understood they had to move now. Together they moved quickly toward the service entrance, away from where Robert and Vanessa were looking. Grace and Michael moved fast, but carefully. The house had security cameras in several places, and Grace knew where they were. She had worked in the house long enough to learn their locations. They avoided the front entrance and passed by the laundry room quietly, staying close to the walls and out of view. Grace guided Michael to a side door used by staff. It was a less visible exit and gave them a better chance to get out without being seen. Michael was struggling to walk. The poison in his system made his steps slow and unsteady, but Grace helped him stay on his feet. When they finally made it outside, Michael turned toward his armored car, parked nearby. He thought they could use it to escape, but Grace quickly stopped him. She told him the car could be tracked. If Robert and Vanessa realized he was gone, that car would be the first place they'd check. It wasn't safe to use it. Grace pulled Michael away from the armored car. She kept telling him they had to keep moving. Time was important, and they couldn't afford to waste it. She helped him through the backyard and out into a narrow, dark street behind the property. There were no lights there, just shadows and silence. Michael was getting worse. His body felt heavier, and it was hard to focus. Grace stayed calm and supported him with one arm. After a few blocks, they reached her car. It wasn't new or fast. It was an old beat-up sedan with dents on the sides and a faded paint job. But it was parked where no one would expect, and it didn't have tracking devices. She helped Michael into the passenger seat and got behind the wheel. Without wasting a second, she started the car and drove off. The engine made a rough sound, but the car moved. Grace stayed focused as she drove through the dark street. and left the neighborhood behind. As they drove farther from the house, Grace kept her eyes on the road. She drove fast, turning at different corners to avoid being followed. The streets changed as they left the area. The big houses and fancy cars gave way to empty roads and dark buildings. Michael leaned back in the seat, trying to stay awake. His head hurt, and his skin felt hot. Grace noticed how pale he looked. She began talking to him, trying to keep him conscious. She told him they couldn't go to a hospital. It was too dangerous. Robert and Vanessa had too much control. If they went to the police, there was a chance someone would tip them off. Grace believed the safest thing to do was stay off the radar. She explained that everything had to be done carefully. Michael tried to understand, but his condition was getting worse. He was sweating, his breathing was slow, and he felt like he might pass out. Grace didn't stop driving. She took sharp turns and kept looking in the rearview mirror. She needed to make sure no one was following them. Michael sat quietly next to her, holding his stomach. His skin was clammy, and he looked like he was going to faint. Grace kept talking to keep him alert. She told him again why hospitals weren't safe. If they brought him in, someone might recognize his name. Robert and Vanessa could use their influence to block treatment or even finish the job. Grace had seen this kind of power before. She had worked in that house for years. She knew how far people like Robert and Vanessa could go to protect their secrets. She reminded Michael to stay awake. He nodded, but slowly. His hands were shaking, and his eyes closed for a few seconds before opening again. The poison was working fast. Grace pushed the gas pedal harder. They needed to get somewhere safe, and they needed to get there soon. Michael leaned his head against the window. His mind was cloudy, and he could barely keep his eyes open. He tried to ask Grace questions, but his words came out weak and hard to understand. Grace answered in short, calm sentences. She didn't panic, even though she was clearly worried. She told him to breathe slowly and not to give up. She reminded him that they had escaped once already, and that meant they could keep going. Michael looked over at her and tried to focus. He wanted to stay awake, but it was getting harder by the minute. Grace gripped the steering wheel tightly and told him to hang on just a little longer. She repeated it over and over, hoping it would help him stay conscious. The old car kept moving through the quiet streets, and Grace didn't stop. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she knew she had to keep Michael alive until they found a place where they could stop and figure out what to do. Michael struggled to keep his eyes open as the car moved forward. His thoughts were slow, but he forced himself to speak. He told Grace that they should call Detective Freeman. He reminded her that Freeman had been his friend for many years and had helped him before. Michael believed this was the right move, maybe the only move left. Grace did not agree. Her face became serious, and she told him the truth. She explained that Detective Freeman was no longer trustworthy. Robert had been paying him for a long time. Freeman was part of the problem, not a solution. Hearing this made Michael feel even worse. He realized how deep the betrayal went. Grace didn't waste time arguing. She reached over, took Michael's phone from his hand, and also grabbed his expensive watch. She told him both items could be used to track them. Before Michael could react, she threw them into a large construction dumpster they passed on the road. The items disappeared among trash and debris. Grace kept driving, focused and alert. After that, Michael's condition became much worse. His body began to shake without warning. His arms tightened and his breathing became uneven. Grace noticed right away and tried to keep him steady in the seat. Michael's eyes rolled back, and for a moment it seemed like he was about to lose consciousness. Grace raised her voice and told him to stay awake. She kept calling his name, telling him to look at her and answer. Michael tried, but his body was no longer under his control. His muscles tightened, then relaxed, then tightened again. Grace placed one hand on the steering wheel and the other on his shoulder when she could. She kept talking to him, reminding him that he had to survive. She told him he could not give up now. The car continued moving forward as Michael's convulsions slowly eased, but he remained very weak and barely responsive. Grace drove out of the city without stopping. The buildings became smaller, and the streets became rougher. The area they entered was clearly poorer. The houses were close together, many looking old and worn. Michael barely noticed the change. His pain continued, and his body felt like it was burning from the inside. He groaned softly, unable to speak clearly. Grace watched him closely, while still keeping her eyes on the road. She slowed down as she entered narrow streets. She knew where she was going. Michael's head fell to the side, and his breathing was shallow. Grace shook him gently and told him to stay with her. She reminded him that they were almost there. His body shook again, harder this time, and his hands curled tightly. Grace felt fear, but she stayed focused. She had brought him this far, and she would not stop now. The car turned into a tight alley, hidden from the main road. Grace finally stopped the car in front of a small, modest home located deep in the alleyway. The place was simple and quiet, nothing like Michael's house. She turned off the engine and looked at him. Michael was barely conscious now. His body felt heavy and limp. Grace opened her door quickly and ran around to his side. She pulled the door open and tried to lift him. It was difficult. Michael was tall and weak, offering no help. Grace wrapped his arm over her shoulder and pulled with all her strength. She told him to hold on, but he could not respond. Slowly, she managed to get him out of the car. People nearby noticed the movement. A few neighbors stood outside, watching with curious and suspicious looks. Grace ignored them. She focused only on getting Michael inside. She closed the car door with her foot and dragged him toward the gate, breathing hard with effort. Every step was a struggle. Grace's arms hurt and her legs shook, but she didn't stop. Michael's feet dragged on the ground and his head leaned against her shoulder. She reached the gate and pushed it open with her hip. The neighbors continued watching, whispering among themselves, but no one stepped in. Grace pulled Michael through the gate and into the small space beyond it. She stopped for a second to catch her breath, then continued. Michael's body was completely limp now. She adjusted her grip and moved forward again. Her hands slipped, but she tightened her hold and kept going. She told herself she could not drop him, not here, not now. Each step forward felt slower than the last, but she kept moving. The gate closed behind them, cutting off the outside world. Grace dragged Michael towards safety, one painful step at a time. When they were finally inside the yard, Grace leaned against the wall for a moment, still holding Michael upright. Her chest moved fast as she tried to breathe. Michael did not speak or move. His eyes were half closed and his face was pale. Grace whispered to him, telling him he was safe for now. She adjusted her grip again and pulled him closer to the door of the house. Her body was tired, but she forced herself to continue. The neighbors were no longer visible and the alley was quiet again. Grace focused only on the task in front of her. She pulled Michael forward, dragging his body across the ground until they reached the door. Her arms shook, but she did not let go. She had promised herself she would protect him, and she intended to keep that promise. Step by step, with all the strength she had left, Grace brought Michael closer to safety, refusing to stop. Grace pulled Michael fully inside her tiny house and closed the door behind them. The space was small and simple, with very little room to move. She dragged him carefully across the floor and laid him down on an old couch that sagged in the middle. Michael barely reacted. His body was heavy and weak, and his breathing was uneven. Grace took a moment to steady herself, then moved quickly. She went to every door and window, locking each one and checking them twice. She wanted to make sure no one could come in. The house was quiet inside, but outside she could hear people talking and moving through the neighborhood. Grace ignored it. She returned to Michael and knelt beside the couch. His skin was hot and his face was pale. She knew the poison was still working through his body. She told herself she had to stay calm and focused. There was no one else to help. Everything depended on her now. Grace went to the small bathroom and soaked some towels with cool water. She brought them back and placed them gently on Michael's forehead and neck to help lower his fever. He moved slightly, but did not wake. His lips were dry, and his chest rose and fell slowly. Grace stayed close, watching every breath. She spoke to him quietly, telling him he was safe for now. Michael drifted in and out of consciousness. When he mumbled, his words were unclear, but Grace could hear pain and fear in his voice. He spoke about betrayal, repeating the same broken thoughts. Grace listened without interrupting. She did not correct him or ask questions. She just stayed there, replacing the towels when they warmed and wiping sweat from his face. She knew this was going to be a long night. She sat on the floor beside the couch, ready to respond if his condition changed. Leaving him alone was not an option. As time passed, Grace noticed Michael struggling to breathe more easily. She gently removed his shoes so his body could rest better. Then she carefully opened his shirt, loosening it so his chest was not restricted. She made sure every movement was slow and calm, so she wouldn't hurt him. Michael's eyes opened briefly, then closed again. His breathing remained shallow, but it was steady. Grace placed another cool towel on his chest and kept one hand near his arm, feeling for movement. She did not leave the room. She listened to the sounds outside, voices, distant music, and cars passing by. Inside the house, everything felt still. Grace stayed alert, watching Michael closely. His face tightened at times, and he whispered again about being betrayed. Grace told him softly that he was not alone. She reminded herself that keeping him alive was the only thing that mattered right now. The night grew longer, and Grace remained by Michael's side. She sat on a chair near the couch, leaning forward whenever he moved or made a sound. His body trembled at times, then went still again. Grace continued changing the wet towels and checking his temperature with her hand. Her eyes felt heavy, but she forced herself to stay awake. She knew she could not afford to rest. Michael suddenly stirred and opened his eyes wider than before. He looked at Grace with confusion. His gaze was unfocused and his voice was weak. He called her by another name and asked why she was there. Grace realized he thought she was his mother. She did not correct him. Instead, she answered gently, telling him everything was okay. She said she was there with him and that he was safe. Michael seemed calmer after hearing her voice. Michael's eyes slowly closed again and his breathing became quieter. Grace stayed close, her attention never leaving him. She adjusted the towel on his forehead and brushed his hair back with her hand. Outside, the neighborhood remained loud. People argued, laughed, and moved through the narrow streets. The noise came through the thin walls, but it did not break Grace's focus. Inside the small house, everything centered on the couch and the man lying on it. Grace sat there, watching and waiting. She did not know what would happen next, but she was ready to face it. Her body was tired and her muscles ached, but her mind stayed firm. She had brought Michael here to protect him, and she would not leave his side. As the hours passed, she remained still and determined, listening to his breathing and holding on to hope. The night continued, slow and heavy. Grace stayed seated beside the couch, her hands resting on her knees when she was not tending to Michael. She spoke to him softly whenever he moved, reminding him that someone was there. Michael did not fully wake again, but his face relaxed at times, as if he could hear her. Grace stayed alert to every small change. She checked the locks once more, without leaving the room, making sure the house remained secure. Outside, the noise never fully stopped, but inside, there was only quiet focus and care. Grace's thoughts stayed simple. She needed to keep him stable. She needed to keep him hidden. She needed to keep him alive. That was all. As the night went on, her resolve did not weaken. She stayed by his side, ready for whatever came next, holding on to her promise to protect him, no matter how long it took. Michael slowly opened his eyes, confused and dizzy. His body felt heavy, and his mouth was dry. He didn't know where he was at first. Everything looked unfamiliar. The walls were close together and the air was still. He tried to sit up but didn't have the strength. That's when he saw Grace beside him. She helped him lift his head and held a glass of water to his lips. He drank slowly, coughing a little. His hands trembled. Grace told him to take it easy. With her help, he stood and tried to walk, though his legs felt unsteady. She guided him down a narrow hallway toward the bathroom. Once inside, he looked in the mirror above the sink. What he saw shocked him. His face was pale, his eyes were sunken, and he looked nothing like the confident man he used to be. The poison had changed him. He leaned on the sink for support, breathing heavily, trying to understand what had happened to him. After a moment, Grace turned on the cold water in the shower and helped him step inside. The water hit his skin and made him shiver, but it also helped him wake up more. He stayed in the shower for several minutes, letting the water wash over him. When he came out, Grace was waiting with a clean change of clothes. They were simple and a bit loose, but comfortable. He sat down again and slowly got dressed, still moving carefully. He looked at Grace and asked her what he had said while he was sick. She hesitated but answered truthfully. She told him that during his fever, he had called out to his mother. He had begged her for forgiveness and said he was sorry. He had also spoken about Vanessa, saying he would never forgive her and that he wanted revenge. Michael looked away, silent for a moment. Hearing that made everything feel even more real. The betrayal still burned inside him. By the next day, Michael had recovered a bit more. He could move around on his own now, although he still looked pale and tired. He ate some food Grace prepared, but his appetite wasn't strong. His body was healing slowly, but his mind remained tense and focused. He kept thinking about what Vanessa and Robert had done to him. The memory of hearing them talk about the poison was stuck in his head. Every few minutes, he would glance at the door or window, as if expecting someone to come after him. Grace tried to keep things calm, telling him to rest and stay quiet. In the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Michael froze. Grace told him to go into the back room and stay out of sight. She opened the door a crack and found Mrs. Carter, the neighbor, standing there. The woman was curious and full of questions. Grace made up an excuse to send her away. Grace told Mrs. Carter that she wasn't feeling well and didn't want to pass on a cold. The woman frowned, but finally left, still suspicious. Grace closed the door and locked it. Michael came back out, still nervous. He asked if it was safe, and Grace nodded, but she looked concerned. They couldn't risk people noticing anything strange. Too many questions could bring the wrong kind of attention. After everything calmed down, Grace turned on the small television in the corner of the room. They sat together on the worn-out couch and watched the screen. The local news was on. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then Michael's face appeared. The report said that Vanessa and Robert were accusing him of fraud. They claimed that he had stolen money from the company and that he and Grace were involved in an affair. Michael clenched his jaw. Grace looked shocked. The lies were now public, and they had just become the targets. The news report continued, repeating the accusations. Vanessa appeared on screen, looking upset but composed. She told reporters that Michael had been acting strangely and had possibly taken off with important documents. She said she and Robert had tried to help him, but were left with no choice. Robert stood next to her, saying he hoped Michael would return and explain himself. Michael stared at the screen, speechless. He knew everything they were saying was false, but it didn't matter. Now the world believed their version. Grace turned off the TV and looked at him. "They're building a story," she said. "They want people to see you as the villain." Michael nodded slowly. He knew this was just the beginning. Now it wasn't only about survival, it was about proving the truth. But doing that wouldn't be easy. His face was already all over the news, and every move he made had to be careful. He sat quietly, thinking about what to do next. Michael leaned back on the couch, still trying to absorb everything. The betrayal by Vanessa and Robert was already hard enough to face, but now the public believed their lies too. He rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. Grace stayed quiet, giving him space, but staying nearby. He thanked her for everything, knowing she didn't have to help him, but still did. Grace reminded him again to stay calm and hidden. She explained that now they had to be extra careful. If anyone recognized him, or if Mrs. Carter became more suspicious, things could go wrong fast. Michael agreed. He decided to lay low for a while, at least until he could think of a better plan. He was still weak and couldn't move fast if needed. For now, hiding was the only option. As the day ended, he stayed close to the window, watching the street quietly, thinking about what Vanessa and Robert would do next. Michael sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the television screen. The news showed Vanessa standing outside the mansion, surrounded by flashing cameras and microphones. Her face was full of fake sadness, and she held a tissue in her hand, pretending to wipe away tears. She spoke to the reporters, saying she was heartbroken over Michael's disappearance. She claimed she didn't understand why he had left or how things had gone so wrong. Her words were calm and carefully chosen, but Michael could see the lies in her eyes. Then the camera turned to Robert, who stood beside her. He looked serious and spoke in a strong voice. He said that Michael had stolen a large amount of money from the company and had disappeared without warning. He told the reporters that they were working with the authorities and wanted Michael to come forward. Watching them speak so confidently as if they were the victims made Michael feel sick. Everything they said was a complete lie. The report went on, showing photos of Michael and Grace together. A voiceover explained that Grace was believed to be more than just a housekeeper. The news accused her of being Michael's secret lover and a partner in the supposed fraud. Grace sat on the floor near the couch, holding her hands together tightly. When she heard her name on the news, her body tensed. As they continued speaking lies about her, saying she had helped Michael run away and steal from the company, her eyes filled with tears. She had kept quiet and strong through everything so far, but this was too much. Her name and face were now being shown to the whole world as if she was a criminal. She began to cry, shaking from the stress. Michael turned off the TV and moved closer. He looked at her and said he was sorry. He promised her that he would fix this and clear her name, no matter what it took. After a few minutes, Grace wiped her face and took a deep breath. Michael asked her if there was any way they could get something to prove the truth. She thought for a moment and nodded slowly. She told him that inside his office at the mansion there was a safe. Inside that safe, he had once stored private files, documents, backups, and maybe even recordings. Michael remembered that, but he hadn't thought about it in a long time. Grace said the safe might still have something useful, something they could use to show what Vanessa and Robert had done. But getting back into the mansion wouldn't be easy. Michael agreed. They needed a plan. That was when Grace mentioned the gala. She told him that Vanessa was hosting a big party the next evening. It was a charity event, and a lot of important people would be there. The house would be full of guests, music, and noise. It might be their only chance to slip in unnoticed. Michael listened carefully as Grace explained everything she knew about the house's layout and security. She had worked there for years and remembered every room, hallway, and camera. She told him which doors were usually unlocked and which ones had alarms. She even knew the times when the guards changed shifts. She pointed out a few weak spots, places where they could enter without being seen. Michael was surprised by how much she remembered. He had lived in that house for a long time, but now he realized Grace probably knew it better than he ever had. He asked questions, and she answered with calm detail. Together, they began to build a step-by-step plan. They would wait until the gala was in full swing. With so many people inside, no one would notice if two more entered from a side door. They would move quickly, head to the office, and get into the safe. Everything had to happen fast, with no mistakes. They continued working on the plan for the rest of the evening. Grace drew a simple map of the house from memory, showing the locations of cameras and guards. Michael noted down every detail, trying to stay focused even though he was still weak. Grace reminded him which rooms would be locked and which ones might be used for the event. She also warned him about new changes Vanessa had made to the house in the last year. Extra locks, a new alarm system, and 2 new security guards who didn't know Grace. They decided that Grace would lead the way inside while Michael kept watch. They would avoid drawing attention and stay close to the service areas where staff usually moved. If something went wrong, they needed a backup plan to escape quickly. Michael thanked her again for helping him. Grace said she just wanted to stop the lies and protect the truth. They both knew the risk was high, but they were ready. By nightfall, they had reviewed the plans several times. Every movement had to be clear in their minds. Michael felt more confident now, even if his body was still healing. The thought of confronting Vanessa and Robert, of taking back control, gave him strength. Grace prepared a small bag with things they might need. Gloves, a flashlight, and a copy of the old office key that she had kept for emergencies. She was nervous, but determined. Michael looked at her with respect. She had done more for him than anyone else, and he owed her his life. They decided to rest a little before the next day. Tomorrow would be long and dangerous, and they needed to be alert. As they sat in the quiet room, the sound of the city outside seemed far away. What mattered now was the truth. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about the safe. Inside could be the proof that would change everything. They just had to reach it. Grace stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her old housekeeper uniform. It had been a long time since she wore it, but it still fit. She made sure every part looked perfect. Neat hair, simple shoes, and clean gloves. She knew the uniform would help her blend in with the rest of the staff at the mansion. She practiced standing and walking the way she used to when she worked there. Her back straight, eyes down, no expression. She had to look like she belonged. Michael stood nearby, watching her get ready. He handed her a small burner phone and explained that it had a live microphone. He would be listening the whole time. She nodded and put it in her pocket. He wished her good luck and reminded her to be careful. Grace took a deep breath. They had spent hours planning every step, and now it was time to act. She left quietly, keeping her focus. Everything depended on her now. That evening, the mansion was busy with noise and lights. Guests were arriving for the gala, and music played from the main hall. Grace approached the house from the back, staying out of sight. She found the broken window in the basement, something she had noticed weeks ago while cleaning, back when no one cared to fix it. She pushed it open slowly and crawled inside. The basement was dark and full of old furniture and boxes. She moved carefully, avoiding anything that might make noise. Once upstairs, she passed near the kitchen and laundry room. Staff moved around quickly, too busy to notice one more person in uniform. Grace kept her head down and walked with purpose, just like the others. She reached the hallway leading to the office without being stopped. When she got to the office door, she punched in the security code. The lock clicked open. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, her heart racing but her hands steady. Inside the office, everything looked just as she remembered. The books, the heavy desk, and the safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. She walked to the safe and entered the code. The door opened, and inside she found what they had hoped for. A small vial with a clear liquid and several medical files. She took a closer look at the papers. They were fake medical documents, designed to make Michael's poisoning look like a natural illness. There were charts and forged test results, all carefully made to fool any doctor. Grace picked up the vial and the documents and put them into her bag. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from how close she was to finishing the task. Just as she turned to leave, she heard a noise outside. Someone was opening the door. There was no time to run. She quickly moved under the desk, pulling the chair in front of her, hoping it would hide her. Grace held her breath as the office door opened fully. From under the desk, she saw the legs of two people walk in. She didn't need to see their faces to know it was Robert and Vanessa. Their voices confirmed it. They were laughing, talking like nothing was wrong. Grace pressed record on the phone and kept it still. She stayed quiet and listened. Vanessa said she was glad everything was working out, and Robert joked about how easy it had been to get rid of Michael. They spoke without holding back. Robert said no one would ever find out about the poison, and Vanessa mentioned how she had helped forge the medical files. They talked about how they planned to take full control of the company now. Grace couldn't believe how open they were being. Every word they said made her angrier, but she didn't move. She just kept recording. This was the proof they needed, and she had to capture it all. The conversation continued for several minutes. Vanessa complained about having to act so sad on the news, and Robert laughed about how the world had believed them. He said people were so easy to trick when you gave them a good story. Vanessa agreed, saying Michael's name was already ruined and no one would doubt them now. Grace stayed still, her body tense, listening to every word. They joked about Grace too, calling her a nobody who had probably run off scared. That made Grace clench her jaw, but she didn't move. She needed them to keep talking. They said everything out loud, how they had planned the poisoning, how they used the gala to keep everyone distracted, and how they had made sure Michael had no one to turn to. Grace knew the phone was recording every detail. It was enough to prove what they had done. She had what she came for. Now she just needed to get out without being seen. After a few more minutes, Robert and Vanessa finally left the office. Grace waited until their voices faded down the hallway before she dared to breathe again. Her muscles were sore from staying still so long, but she didn't move right away. She needed to be sure they were gone. After counting slowly in her head, she pushed the chair aside and crawled out from under the desk. She stood up carefully and checked the hallway through the small glass panel in the door. It was clear. She took the phone from her pocket, stopped the recording, and put it away safely. Then she grabbed the bag with the vial and documents and slipped out of the office. She moved quickly and quietly back the way she came, avoiding anyone who might notice her. Her mind was focused only on escaping. She had done it. She had the proof. Now she just had to make it back to Michael and give him everything they needed to fight back. Grace stayed completely still under the desk, careful not to make a sound. From where she was hiding, she could hear every word Robert and Vanessa said. They talked openly, not suspecting anyone was listening. They spoke about Michael like he was already gone forever. Vanessa said things were going better than expected, and Robert agreed. They both sounded confident, almost relaxed. They believed their plan had worked. Robert mentioned how they would sell everything, Michael's company, his properties, even his personal belongings. He said the money would be more than enough for them to live a good life without having to work. Vanessa talked about the places she wanted to travel to and how she looked forward to never having to pretend anymore. They joked about how people were easy to fool, especially when money was involved. Grace listened closely, knowing every word was important. She made sure her phone was still recording. This was proof, and she couldn't miss a second of it. When Robert and Vanessa finally left the office, Grace waited a little longer before moving. She didn't want to take any chances. Once she was sure the hallway was clear, she came out from under the desk and quietly moved to the door. Her heart was racing, but she kept her steps light and fast. She opened the door slightly and checked both sides. The hallway looked empty. She stepped out and started walking back toward the basement, retracing the path she had used to enter. But just as she turned a corner near the supply rooms, she came face to face with Mrs. Matthews, the head housekeeper. The woman froze, clearly surprised to see Grace there. It took her only a second to recognize her, and then she opened her mouth and screamed for help. Grace didn't hesitate. She rushed forward and quickly covered the woman's mouth with her hand, pushing her back into one of the supply rooms and closing the door behind them. Inside the small room, Grace acted quickly. Mrs. Matthews struggled, but Grace was stronger and more focused. She managed to push her down and held her still long enough to stop the screaming. Grace looked around and spotted some cleaning supplies and a roll of cloth. She used them to tie the woman's hands and feet, making sure she couldn't call for help again. Then she helped her sit in the corner and close the door, locking it from the outside. Grace felt bad, but she didn't have a choice. She whispered through the door that she was sorry and that she didn't want to hurt anyone. After making sure the hallway was still empty, she continued on her way. As she passed a storage rack near the laundry room, she noticed something familiar. There were some discarded clothes in a basket, an old house dress that used to belong to her, and one of Michael's old suits. She grabbed both pieces and stuffed them into her bag without stopping. Grace knew she didn't have much time left before someone would notice she was there. She moved quickly through the hallway, back down into the basement. She walked as fast as she could without making too much noise. Once she reached the basement, she followed the same path she had used to enter. She passed the same boxes and old furniture, keeping her head low. The broken window was still open. She dropped her bag on the ground and climbed up to the ledge. It was a tight squeeze, and the edges of the window scraped her arms as she pushed herself through. But she didn't stop. She knew she had to get out before someone came looking. Once she was outside, she grabbed the bag and ran across the lawn. The grass was soft and uneven, but she didn't slow down. She stayed close to the shadows, moving quickly away from the mansion, not looking back. The documents, the vial, the recording, they were all with her now. The night air was cool, and the mansion's lights were still glowing behind her as Grace kept running. She didn't stop until she was far enough away to feel a little safer. Then she slowed down to catch her breath. Her arms were sore, her legs hurt, and her heart was beating fast. But she had done it. Everything they had worked for, everything Michael had hoped for, was now possible. She carried the proof they needed to show the world the truth. She looked around to make sure no one was following her, then kept walking in the direction she had come from earlier. Every step took her farther from the danger and closer to safety. Her bag was heavy with the items she had taken, but she held it tightly. The dress and the suit might help them later if they needed to hide or change their appearance. For now, the most important thing was getting back to Michael and showing him that the mission had worked. Grace walked through the side streets, staying away from busy areas. She avoided main roads and moved quickly through alleys and quiet blocks. It was late, and most people were inside their homes, which helped her stay unnoticed. Her body was tired, but her mind was focused. She kept thinking about what Robert and Vanessa had said. They had been so sure of themselves, so convinced that no one could stop them. That made Grace even more determined. She knew what she had to do next. Once she reached a safe place, she would contact Michael and show him everything. The recording, the poison vial, the fake medical documents, all of it was strong evidence. Michael would know what to do with it. As she walked farther away from the mansion, her steps grew slower, but her determination stayed strong. She had risked everything tonight, but it had been worth it. Now it was time to fight back with the truth, and the truth was finally in their hands. Michael sat in the parked car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The engine was off, and the street was nearly silent. Every second felt longer than the last. He kept glancing at the dashboard clock, then toward the direction Grace had gone. His heart was pounding. He had imagined everything that could go wrong. If she was caught, if someone recognized her, if she couldn't find the evidence, any one of those things could mean disaster. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the dark path ahead. Then finally, he saw movement. It was her. Grace was running toward the car, her hair messy, her uniform out of place, and her face sweaty, but she was alive. As she got closer, he jumped out of the car and ran to her. Without thinking, he pulled her into a hug. She didn't say anything at first, just handed him the small bag. Inside was the vial, the forged papers, and her phone with the recorded confession. They both knew this was everything. Once they were back inside the car, they locked the doors. Grace leaned back in the seat, breathing heavily. Michael opened the bag and carefully looked through its contents. He held up the small poison vial and stared at it for a moment. Then he took the phone and checked the recording. Grace nodded, confirming it captured everything. There was no time to waste. They both knew they needed to act fast. Grace looked around and told Michael that Matilda, Mrs. Matthews, had seen her and screamed. She had to lock her in a supply closet to escape. That meant the alarm would be raised soon. They had to be gone before someone came looking. They reached into the back seat where they had stored clothes earlier. Grace pulled out the black dress she had found, and Michael grabbed his old suit. Without speaking, they quickly changed, focused only on what needed to be done next. There was no time for anything else, just the mission ahead. Michael changed into the suit he hadn't worn in a long time. It was slightly wrinkled, but still looked sharp. Grace put on the black dress. It was simple but clean, and fit her well. They looked completely different now. No longer like two fugitives hiding in the shadows. They looked like two people with a purpose. Michael checked his reflection in the car mirror, adjusting the collar and brushing back his hair. Grace tied her hair up and straightened her dress. They didn't smile or talk much. There was no need. They both understood what was coming. This wasn't about getting revenge anymore. It was about ending the lies, showing the truth, and taking back control of their lives. Everything they had suffered, everything they had lost, was leading to this moment. They weren't going to wait for justice. They were going to bring it themselves. Grace told Michael again that time was against them. The house would soon realize she had been there. Michael nodded and started the car. The engine turned on, and the headlights lit the road ahead. Grace sat beside him, holding the phone in her hands. She made sure the recording was saved properly and backed it up to the burner device. Every piece of evidence was now secure. Michael drove through the narrow streets, heading away from the mansion. They didn't speak much, but the silence was full of purpose. They were no longer confused, no longer unsure. The plan was clear. Michael looked at Grace and told her they needed to be ready for whatever came next. She agreed. She had already risked everything by going back into the house. Now they had one job, to use what they had and expose the truth before Robert and Vanessa could spin another lie. Time was short, but they were ahead. For now. They drove with focus, both of them thinking about the next step, both knowing there was no turning back now. As the car moved through the city, lights flashed past the windows, but Michael barely noticed them. He kept his hands steady on the wheel and his eyes on the road. Grace was next to him, going through every detail in her mind. She repeated the steps of the plan quietly, making sure nothing was forgotten. The suit and dress they wore weren't for show. They were part of the message. They were stepping back into the world not as broken people, but as survivors who had proof. They weren't going to hide anymore. Michael adjusted the rearview mirror and reminded Grace that the next hours would be critical. They had one shot to get it right. Grace said she was ready. Her voice was calm, but firm. They had everything they needed. The vial, the fake documents, the recording. They just needed to move fast before Robert and Vanessa could react. Michael stepped on the gas. There was no room for fear now, only action. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew how dangerous things still were. Vanessa and Robert were powerful and had already proven they were willing to go to extremes to protect themselves. But now, for the first time, Michael and Grace had an advantage. The evidence was solid. The voices on the recording were clear. The documents were undeniable. And the poison was still in the original container. All of it told a story, one that couldn't be ignored. Michael thought about everything he had lost, his health, his company, his name. Grace had lost her home, her safety, and her quiet life. But what they had gained now was stronger, the truth. The car moved forward, taking them closer to whatever came next. They didn't know how people would react or how much damage Vanessa and Robert had already done, but they were ready to face it. There was no more hiding, no more waiting. This time, they were going to speak. and they would be heard. They arrived at the gala just as the night was reaching its peak. The mansion was brightly lit, its windows glowing, and the front garden filled with expensive cars and well-dressed guests. Security stood at the main entrance, but no one seemed alarmed. Everyone inside was focused on the celebration. Grace and Michael parked their car farther down the street and walked calmly toward the house. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, music, and glasses clinking. The entire place had an energy of wealth and power. Dressed in their recovered formal clothes, Michael and Grace looked like any other guests. No one gave them a second glance. They blended in perfectly. Michael's suit gave him back some of the presence he had lost in recent days, and Grace's dress made her look like she belonged among the crowd. Holding the phone in her small clutch and the vial tucked safely away, they stepped inside. Every detail of the plan echoed in their minds as they crossed the threshold. Once inside, the noise of the event surrounded them. Live music played in the corner of the ballroom, and guests stood in small groups, chatting about business, politics, and society. Waiters moved between the guests with trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Michael and Grace moved carefully through the crowd. They didn't rush or draw attention to themselves. Their eyes scanned the room as they walked, looking for familiar faces. The chandeliers above them sparkled, and the polished floor reflected the lights. Everyone was smiling, unaware of what was coming. Grace whispered to Michael that Robert and Vanessa were most likely near the front stage. That's where the hosts always stood when it was time for announcements or speeches. Michael nodded and led the way. The crowd didn't recognize them at first glance. Most people there didn't expect to see the man they thought had disappeared. As they got closer to the stage area, they could see Robert talking to a small group while Vanessa stood beside him. Michael felt his heart pounding, but stayed calm. He knew this was the moment. Grace gave him a small nod, showing she was ready too. He took a few more steps forward, then raised his voice above the noise. At first, no one paid attention. Then he said Robert's name again, louder. A few heads turned. Conversations stopped. The music faded. Everyone looked toward the man speaking. Michael stood tall and clear, holding up the phone in one hand and the small vial in the other. People began to recognize him. Whispers started moving through the crowd. Robert and Vanessa froze. They didn't expect to see Michael alive, especially not here. Michael told the room he had been poisoned. He said the people responsible were right in front of them. He explained what the vial was and played the recording from the phone. The voices of Robert and Vanessa filled the room. Their words, their jokes, their lies, all of it was heard by everyone standing there. The guests listened closely, many in shock. The audio played clearly, with Robert and Vanessa talking about how they planned everything. Their laughter, their casual cruelty, and their confessions could not be denied. Grace stood beside Michael, watching the crowd's reaction. Faces turned from curiosity to disbelief, then to anger. Some people gasped. Others looked directly at Robert and Vanessa with expressions of betrayal. A few guests pulled out their phones, already recording or calling someone. Robert tried to speak, but his words were weak. Vanessa stepped forward, trying to deny it, but the recording was still playing. Their voices were too clear, the evidence too strong. Michael didn't shout, he didn't need to. His calm words, his presence, and the truth in his hands were more powerful than anything else in the room. He told them everything: the forged documents, the fake test results, and the attempt to destroy his life and frame Grace. He reminded them that it wasn't just betrayal, it was attempted murder. People in the room started asking questions, and the mood shifted quickly. A few security guards moved forward, unsure of what to do. Some guests demanded answers from Robert and Vanessa. Michael repeated that this wasn't about revenge. He said it was about the truth. He had almost died. Grace had almost been blamed for something she didn't do. They had both been hunted, lied about, and nearly erased. But now they were standing there with the truth, and that couldn't be ignored. Vanessa tried to leave, but a guest blocked her way. Robert looked around, realizing no one was on his side anymore. The image they had created, the story they had told, was falling apart in front of everyone. Michael looked around the room and asked for justice. Not just for him and Grace, but for everyone who had believed in something that wasn't real. The crowd stood in silence for a moment, then voices slowly rose in support. The truth was out now, and nothing could stop it. Grace felt the weight of the last few days begin to lift. She stood close to Michael, watching the walls of lies crumble around Robert and Vanessa. Everything they had done to protect themselves was now useless. The crowd had heard the truth with their own ears. They had seen the proof. Michael held up the phone again and offered it to a well-known lawyer who had just arrived. The man took it without question. People began recording, taking photos, capturing every part of what was happening. Grace looked around at the guests, people she had once passed by quietly while working in the house, now watching her as an equal and someone who had helped bring out the truth. The night that had started as a celebration for Robert and Vanessa was now something completely different. It had become the moment when lies were broken apart. Michael and Grace stood tall, not as victims anymore, but as the ones who refused to be silent and who finally made the truth impossible to ignore. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Now that you've finished watching this incredible story, click on my profile picture and access my videos. I'm sure you'll be enchanted by all the good stories about justice and kindness. Enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.